Hello, everyone, and welcome to this information session for the call for proposals for Canada's International Youth Internship Program. My name is Ariel Ann Lyons, and I am the Deputy Director for the Volunteer Cooperation Program and the International Internship Programs with the Partnerships for Development and Innovation at Global Affairs Canada. I'm here today along with my colleague, Danica Gay, who will be hosting this session in English. Before we continue, we want to emphasize that we are speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We recognize that we work and live in different places and that you may be on a different Indigenous territory. I invite you to take a moment to think about, acknowledge, and seek to learn more about the peoples of the land you are on. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the presence of sign language interpreters. This session is offered in ASL and in LSQ for the French session. Thank you for being here. The International Youth Internship Program is a program delivered by GAC and is part of the Government of Canada's Youth Employment and Skills Strategy. For 25 years, the program has provided young Canadians with the opportunity to gain international work experience in the field of international development and to develop skills that will prepare them for the future employment or to further their education. On a personal level, I know how transformative this experience can be, as I am a former participant of the program who benefited greatly from the experience, and it is, among other things, thanks to this opportunity that I am now working in the field of international solidarity. The call for proposals page, published on November 30th, is the main reference point where you will find all the information you need. Today, we are going to review the information listed on the call page by giving you a little more context on what we're looking for in the proposal. The content of this session is based on questions we've received from you so far and on aspects that we suspect may be of interest. Please note that the information shared in the French session is exactly the same as that shared in the English session. The Government of Canada has made a commitment to reach youth who face barriers to employment. GAC wants to ensure that future implementing organizations adopt a proactive strategy to reach, recruit, and support those youth facing barriers to employment. That is why, in this call for proposals, we will select projects that target youth ages 18 to 30 and who identify with a group that faces discrimination, such as youth living with disabilities, Indigenous youth, racialized youth, and youth from the 2S LGBTQI+ community. You may choose to reach other groups of youth for whom you can clearly explain the discrimination and the barriers to employment that they face. Due to the pandemic, many implementing partners from the previous iteration of the IYIP offered virtual internship experiences. This allowed youth who had constraints limiting their ability to travel to participate. As such, it is possible to include virtual components for internships in general, but GAC emphasizes virtual internships are strictly an accommodation for youth who would not otherwise be able to travel. The applicant must demonstrate that a virtual internship is the only possible modality to ensure the youth's participation. You may have noticed there is no longer a minimum or maximum duration for the internship program. GAC believes that applicants are in the best position to determine the balance of the cost, duration, and quality of internships with the number of youth participants. We would like to emphasize the importance of the internships as transformative experiences for youth. Throughout your proposal, be sure to describe how the design of your internship project will enable a transformative experience. We have also added an Other Comments and Reflections section near the end of the application form, allowing you to add any new components to the project that are not covered in other sections. We encourage you to propose new ideas and ways of doing things. Be bold. You won't be penalized for thinking outside the box. We are also experimenting. We will allow for verbal testimonials from local partners or organizations that work with the youth groups you are targeting. Once the process is complete, please let us know what you thought of this feature and whether or not you liked it. Applicants are responsible for determining the best local organizations to provide transformative internships for the participants. In the most recent iterations, it was shown that the depth and quality of the relationship between the Canadian implementing organization and the local partner is an important indicator of the success of the project. We therefore encourage you to describe in detail partnerships you are proposing. We will now review the various elements of the call in more detail, which are gender equality, the human rights-based approach, environmental sustainability and climate resilience, results-based management, and finally, finances. You will notice that some sections overlap. This is because gender equality, human rights, and environmental issues are interconnected. This should be reflected not only in the elaboration of internship placements, but also in the way you design the project. However, there's no need to repeat information already covered in one section of the application form. Your proposal will be evaluated as a whole and not section by section.
We will start with gender equality. Although this call refers to Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, the requirements for this call are different. The tools generally used to analyze and assess development results for Canadian and local partners on gender equality are less relevant to this call. The proposal submitted will focus on the capacities of Canadian organizations to implement quality internships in international development with and for youth in Canada. Therefore, the gender assessment that is part of our evaluation of the proposals we will receive will focus on the applicant's understanding of the structural issues youth face, which includes gender equality. Applicants will need to demonstrate their understanding of the particular issues youth targeted by the project are confronted with. Applicants will also need to describe how, if applicable, they believe that youth could overcome some of these issues through their participation in the proposed internships.
Danica, can you describe the key elements of a gender equality analysis that should be included in the proposal?
Yeah, here are a few key points. Include the demographic characteristics of the targeted youth. For example, the ratio of women to men to non-binary persons and other genders. How your recruitment and retention strategy will take gender issues into account. The structural causes of exclusion from the workplace, including gender inequality, intersectionality, and the power dynamics that these youth face. You can demonstrate how your analysis of these causes have helped shape the outcomes your project will seek to achieve. If applicable, how your project will continue to challenge unequal gender norms in Canada and or in the host country or countries. How youth's participation in these internships will contribute to fostering gender equality. For example, changed attitudes due to participating in awareness raising activities on gender equality as part of the internship mandate or as part of pre-departure trainings. It is important to demonstrate understanding of gender equality impacts associated with the proposed internship assignments and how such considerations are incorporated into internship design. Although a full gender-based analysis plus is not required for your proposal, we invite you to consult the Global Affairs Canada Gender-Based Analysis Guidelines and the links provided in the call for proposals page to better understand the types of questions to ask when identifying the structural causes of inequality.
Danica, can you share a few examples of what strong gender integration in a proposal looks like?
Proposals can demonstrate a strong integration by making explicit links between the project and the action areas of Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, namely human dignity, inclusive growth, environment and climate action, inclusive governance, and peace and security. Beyond gender, document other equity issues, for example, disability, economic marginalization, and explain how the proposal will seek to address these issues. Explain the gender equality risks identified and how these will be mitigated. For example, the risk of sexual harassment. A mitigation strategy may include taking into consideration the youth targeted by the project in your policy or protocol to prevent and address such harm. Describe local partners' experiences, institutional policies, expertise, or capacity related to gender equality. For example, do they have a full time gender equality advisor on their team, or do they have an in house feminist policy? And lastly, a strong integration of gender equality could describe how the proposed monitoring and evaluation approach will allow the project to facilitate the participation of local stakeholders, including women and girls. Now let's move on to the next section on human rights. In this call, the human rights component is addressed in terms of the inclusion and participation of youth in the design and delivery of the project. In this context, when we evaluate the proposals received, we will take into considerations the following elements.
1. An analysis of the human rights challenges faced by the youth targeted by the project. For example, youth with disabilities may find it difficult to continue their studies since educational institutions may not have the infrastructure and resources necessary to meet their needs. 2. Proposals should demonstrate how the internship will contribute to addressing the challenges and barriers to employment faced by the youth groups targeted. 3. If applicable, describe how the internship assignments could help build local partners' capacity and other stakeholders to provide inclusive environments that address and prevent discrimination. 4. Proposals should clearly demonstrate the steps that will be taken to overcome the challenges and barriers faced by the targeted youth and to ensure their inclusion and full participation during the internship. 5. Proposals must demonstrate how the Canadian organization that will implement the project will ensure a follow up so that both the needs of the youth and the local partners are met. This should include methods of consulting youth and how they are involved in the implementation of the project. 6. Finally, it is important to demonstrate understanding of environmental impacts associated with the proposed internship assignments and how these considerations are incorporated into the design.
There are a few other considerations for demonstrating a human rights based approach in the proposals. The integration of participatory approaches in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the project. Adopting a participatory approach means that the design team should ensure that all key stakeholders, including intermediaries and beneficiaries of all genders, are involved and consulted throughout the project lifecycle, from planning and design to implementation, monitoring, and reporting. Also, consider information collection methods for data and self-identification that aligns with the no harm principle. That is, ensuring respectful language, safety, and confidentiality when collecting personal data. Finally, considerations must be given to the identification of human rights risks. For example, the risk of marginalization and isolation, or the risk of not being able to benefit from medical or mental health support in the host country. We will now discuss environmental sustainability and climate resilience. An internship abroad can be a significant opportunity for an exchange and help strengthen environmental capacities for both interns and local partners. Ariel, what are the essential environmental elements to cover in the project proposal?
First, For this proposal, focus on opportunities that support environmentally sustainable and climate resilient practices, which could enhance the lasting effects of the internships. Also, consider any possible negative impacts the internship could have on the environment or that could contribute negatively to climate change. Finally, consider whether the environmental context could jeopardize the results of the internships. For all internship placements, even those that do not directly relate to the environment, indirect environmental impacts should be considered and incorporated into the internship design. Danica, could you give us some examples?
Yeah, so for example, for internships focused on education, consider opportunities to include environmental education and greening school activities, such as introducing school gardens. For health related internships, consider opportunities to minimize environmental effects on health, such as air and water pollution, and to support health services that minimize harm on the environment, such as well managed water, sanitation, and hygiene activities, and the appropriate disposal of medical waste. For agriculture and food security related internships, consider the effects of agricultural practices on the water, soil, biodiversity, ecosystem, and human health. Wherever possible, support agroecological and climate smart agricultural approaches. Finally, in the context of consumption of local products, take into account the complete life cycle of products and their value chains. It is also important to explain how these considerations will be taken into account in the design of the internship, including the selection of interns, their training, and more. GAC will not allow construction work under this program, except for minor physical works to promote inclusion, such as accessibility ramps. If applicable, describe this in your proposal and indicate how you will install and manage them to avoid environmental damage. Finally, it should be noted that if the proposal is selected and that additional environmental information is necessary, we will discuss this with the organization that will implement the project at a later stage. We will now discuss results based management.
In this call for proposals, a lot of flexibility is given to organizations to determine the results they are hoping to achieve and how they want to collect and present those results to GAC. There will be high level indicators that GAC will need to collect in order to report to the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy. Those indicators will be shared later with the applicants whose proposals will be selected. As for the rest of your indicators and data collection, GAC believes that applicants are the ones who are best suited to propose a strategy they think will be efficient in the context of their specific project. For this section, we're going to talk more about, about defining the impact, the core principles of results-based management, defining what a participatory approach is, and finally, we'll talk about monitoring and evaluation.
On defining impact, applicants are asked to define the impacts of the project. A general definition of impact is on the call page, but in some, it's the effects of the internship has had on the youth participant. This includes the effects of the applicants supporting and facilitating the internships, or in other words, the tailored products or services rendered by the implementing organization with the use of GAC funds. Applicants should ensure they describe impacts while considering the following. Provide a short statement that describes a specific change or series of changes expected among participants. The impacts are realistic and achievable given the project scope, timeframe, and budget. They are clear and specific enough to be measured by a mixture of qualitative and quantitative indicators. They are relevant to the actual needs of the targeted youth and the selected international countries.
The expectation is that applicants will employ the core principles of the results-based management approach and do it in a participatory manner. This includes designing, planning, and managing projects in such a way as to ensure achievement of the impact during the whole life cycle. Basing the project design and plan on a thorough evidence based analysis of the issue and the context in which it exists. This includes a gender based analysis, human rights based approach, and environment and climate action analysis. Demonstrate the understanding that impact or impacts are not within the sole control of a single project, but that this project contributes to and influences the achievement of these impacts, and that impacts must be measured and assessed. Both qualitative and quantitative assessment must be informed by good quality data and lessons learned. Increasing knowledge of what works, what doesn't, and integrating these lessons during the implementation phase and sharing them to inform programming. Identifying and managing risks while bearing in mind the impact and resource implications. And continually communicating information to relevant stakeholders. To this end, applicants are invited to continue to use the results-based management how-to guide on the website, as referred to in the call page. The main difference with other GAC calls is that for this one, you do not need to include a logic model or performance measurement framework to provide more flexibility given IYIP's unique objectives. Danica, can you describe what a participatory approach means?
Taking a participatory approach means one, ensuring stakeholders have a voice in decision making and projects make an active effort to meet their specific needs, ensuring the design team involves and meaningfully consults stakeholders and beneficiaries throughout the project's lifecycle, allocating appropriate time and resources during the project's life cycle. This approach usually requires a good deal of time and resources, but yields sustainable benefits over the long term. The context within which the project is working should inform the appropriateness of methodologies. It is vital that impact and measures are developed through a consensus building process involving all key stakeholders. Any methodology choice must encourage equitable and gender sensitive participation. Ariel, can you please speak on monitoring and evaluation?
Monitoring and evaluation plans should include the following. Describe the measures, data collection tools, methods, sources, frequency, and roles and responsibilities for how results will be monitored and evaluated. GAC commits to working with selected applicants to ensure quality data is planned for, collected, analyzed, and reported. This will ensure GAC manages for results along with the selected organizations and contributes youth-related results and learnings for the youth employment strategy. Impact monitoring and evaluation includes qualitative and quantitative data and information which considers the targeted youth and all the relevant intersectional factors. Resources should be set aside for the development and testing of data collection instruments, as well as for training staff and stakeholders. We will now move on to our last section to discuss budget and finances. Given that IYIP projects will differ from traditional international development projects, we adapted some of the budget and financial expectations for this call. Organizations are still expected to respect GAC's guidelines on eligible costs for international assistance projects and the other applicable policies detailed in the call page. It is most important that organizations propose and justify a realistic budget that aligns with proposed project activities. It might be handy to have a copy of the budget template to refer to, as we will be making specific references to budget lines. Danica, could you speak to the adapted components and the spirit behind financial requirements for this call?
For this call, we wanted to give partners more flexibility as the program is now targeting a significant proportion of youth facing barriers to employment. After selecting partner organizations for funding, GAC will convene working sessions to provide more guidance on the financial aspects of this call. At this time, we can speak to components of the call we suspect you may have questions for. Whether internships are virtual or in person, it is up to the organization to determine and justify the remuneration or allowances proposed for interns. First, let's discuss internships abroad. It is understood that when interns travel for in person placements, they are considered to be in travel status for the duration of their stay abroad. Their allowances may not exceed the thresholds set by the National Joint Council's Travel Directive. Organizations must demonstrate that the proposed allowances are reasonable and justifiable as per youth's living expenses and the cost of living in the host countries. Please take into considerations local partners, equity, and power dynamics when determining the allowances, as we discussed in the human rights section. In person internships cannot receive a salary in addition to allowances, so be sure to indicate all travel expenses for in person internships on line 1.5.1 travel expenses in the budget template. For virtual internships, it is expected that the remuneration interns receive is reasonable and established on comparative market studies that justify the rate of pay. Considerations for intern skills, job descriptions, as well as any other employment conditions must be included in the justification for salary interns will receive. Please indicate these costs at line 1.5.7 with a clear notion of hourly rate, the number of hours, and any other benefits factored into the remuneration costs. On intern recruitment, certain costs associated with recruiting interns are eligible. These include outreach activities in schools, at conferences, career fairs, through digital platforms. These funds cannot be used to recruit staff or to promote the organization or to purchase software or memberships for the organization. Such costs would have to be covered by the 12% overhead. Please include eligible recruitment costs at line 1.5.6, project administration costs. Now on accommodations. Since the IEP is targeting youth-facing barriers to employment, reasonable and necessary costs to accommodate youth will be considered eligible. These will be covered only based on real expenses, meaning that it is not permitted to request lump sums to cover accommodation related costs. Based on the youth targeted, you must demonstrate why such accommodation costs are necessary for their full participation. For example, this could include ASL interpretation costs, special needs support, components for cultural safety, or others. Mental health and well-being of youth are important aspects of this program. Be specific about actual expenses that would be incurred to oversee to consider these aspects. Also, please note that while psychology services are eligible, these costs are only eligible in unfortunate events. This type of expense cannot be ongoing or added for the duration of the project. Rather, it is a budget addition when a situation arises. GAC invites you to describe in detail any accommodation costs contemplated or other costs that you are unsure where to include. Please indicate them in the third tab of the Excel budget spreadsheet. The total from the third tab should be reflected under the line 1.5.7, all other eligible expenses. Innovative engagement activities are a mandatory project component. These costs cannot surpass 10% of the direct cost of the budget and are reserved solely for the public engagement projects interns will do individually or as a group. These costs are to be included under the subline in 1.5.7 for innovative engagement activities. It should be noted that this budget line is reserved for youth activities only. If you wish to include other engagement costs, please include them in the subline 1.5.7, other eligible costs directly related to the project. On subcontractor costs, considering that this call for proposal is not funded by official development assistance, but by the Youth Employment and Skill Strategy, there is a slight flexibility to go beyond the 20% limit of the total value of contribution, only in exceptional cases, to accommodate the participation of certain youth. However, this must be based on reasonable expenses relevant to the project. If the category of consultants is above the 20% threshold, a detailed justification must be provided to GAC. Primarily, this would be considered if, for example, the accommodations you need for interns living with disabilities require a lot of additional support workers, and if you're maximizing the use of subcontractor funds for other project stakeholders, such as local partners. Please ensure that all costs that cover the time and contribution of people who are not employees, such as folks delivering trainings, social workers, or other resource persons or partners, are identified in line 1.3. Local partners are essential to the success of internships. We have noticed that internships are often the most transformative when local partners have a real sense of ownership in the project and are recognized for their contribution. Depending on your contractual relationship with the local partner, you can either use lines 1.2 local employees or 1.3 local subcontractors to recognize the local partner's time and contribution to internship activities. This concludes the items covered in the IIP call for proposals page.
We hope we have clarified your potential questions. Please send any remaining questions to correspondence.pid@international.gc.ca before February 3rd. GAC wants to make sure all applicants have access to the same information at the same time. For this reason, we are not able to respond to questions received after February 3rd or questions about specific organizational circumstances or specific project proposals. All responses will be posted on the IYIP's Q&A page. Please note that GAC may reword applicants' questions to protect their identity and to ensure that questions and answers are broadly applicable to all applicants. Thank you for taking the time to prepare a proposal. We know it can be a long and arduous process. Good luck, and we look forward to reading your proposals. Thank you.